When people think of Britain in the 1970s, the images that often come to mind are vibrant ones. Bright flared trousers, bold music echoing from record players, and the promise of new freedoms that seem to sweep through society. Popular culture has painted the decade as a colorful era of creativity, optimism, and youthful rebellion. Yet for those who actually grew up in that period, the reality was far more complex and at times much harsher than the myth suggests. Behind the glamour of the fashion and the music lay economic crises, urban struggles, and a strict social order that shaped the daily experiences of families across the country. This contrast between perception and lived reality is at the heart of the story. To understand what it was really like to come of age in 1970s Britain, we must look beyond nostalgia and confront the contradictions of the decade. The 1970s in Britain were overshadowed by a deepening economic crisis that touched nearly every household. Inflation soared to levels unseen in previous decades, eating away at wages and making everyday essentials increasingly difficult to afford. Families often found themselves counting pennies at the shops, cutting back on luxuries and even basics. Rising unemployment added to the strain, particularly in industrial towns where whole communities depended on a single factory or mine for work. Strikes became part of daily life, with workers demanding fair pay to match the rising cost of living. The Winter of Discontent in 1978-79 was the most dramatic expression of this unrest, as widespread strikes left rubbish piling up in the streets, and even hospital services disrupted. Power cuts caused by disputes in the energy sector plunged homes into darkness and forced families to gather around candles. Shortages of fuel and certain goods created further frustration, making even routine tasks unpredictable. For many children growing up in this environment, the sense of uncertainty and instability became a defining feature of their formative years. Amid the economic gloom of the 1970s, music became an essential outlet for young people searching for identity and belonging. While older generations still clung to the legacy of the Beatles and the rise of progressive rock, teenagers embraced new, raw sounds that captured their frustration. Punk rock exploded onto the scene in the mid-decade, with bands such as the Sex Pistols and The Clash rejecting polished production in favor of energy, anger, and a do-it-yourself ethos. Their music spoke directly to a generation that felt ignored by politicians and trapped by limited opportunities. Yet punk was only part of the story. Reggae, brought by Caribbean immigrants, infused British music with fresh rhythms and messages of resistance, becoming especially influential in urban centers. Alongside this, glam rock and heavy metal offered different forms of escape and self-expression. Youth subcultures flourished. Punks with their spiked hair and leather jackets, skinheads with their stark style, and mods carrying forward a spirit of rebellion from the 1960s. For many, these cultural movements were more than fashion or soundtracks. They were lifelines, ways of carving out a sense of power and identity in uncertain times. If music gave teenagers an outlet for rebellion, television provided a shared space that united families across Britain. With only 3 main channels available for much of the decade, viewing was a collective experience rather than the solitary habit it would later become. Families gathered around a single set in the living room, planning their evenings around popular programs. This sense of ritual gave television an outsized influence on daily life. Children grew up with beloved shows such as Blue Peter and Doctor Who, while Saturday morning cartoons became treasured highlights of the week. For adults, sitcoms and dramas reflected both the humor and tensions of British society, often sparking conversations that extended well beyond the screen. National events, from royal weddings to major sporting fixtures, became truly unifying moments, with millions watching at the same time. In a period marked by uncertainty and social division, television offered a form of stability and escapism, shaping imaginations and creating cultural touchstones that remain iconic today. The 1970s were a decade of daring style and flamboyance, where fashion became a vivid form of self-expression. Flared trousers, platform shoes, and psychedelic prints dominated the streets, while bright colors and unconventional patterns signaled a break from the more conservative styles of earlier decades. For many young people, what they wore was a statement of identity, aligning them with particular subcultures or musical movements. Punk attire, with leather jackets, ripped clothing, and safety pins, contrasted sharply with the glam rock aesthetic of glitter and sequins, yet both styles conveyed a spirit of defiance and creativity. However, not all families could afford the latest fashions. Economic hardship meant that clothing was often patched, handed down, or purchased secondhand, making style a matter of ingenuity as well as aspiration. Fashion thus became both a symbol of individuality and a reflection of social realities, offering a way for young people to assert themselves in a world where resources were limited but imagination was boundless. While fashion and music painted a colorful picture of 1970s Britain, the reality of urban life was often far bleaker. Cities across the country struggled with pollution, smog hanging over industrial towns and inner-city streets. Housing estates, many hastily constructed in the post-war boom, were frequently in a state of disrepair, with damp, peeling paint and outdated facilities. For families living in these areas, everyday life could be a constant challenge. Public transport was unreliable, with buses and trains often delayed or overcrowded, adding frustration to daily routines. Rubbish strikes compounded the sense of disorder, leaving streets littered and neighborhoods looking neglected. Crime rates were on the rise in some areas, further shaping the urban experience. For children and teenagers, these environments were both a playground and a source of anxiety, providing lessons in resilience and self-reliance. Amidst the vibrancy of cultural trends and personal expression, the stark reality of Britain's urban landscapes offered a sobering backdrop to daily life in the decade. For children growing up in 1970s Britain, school was often a world of strict rules and rigid discipline. Corporal punishment was still widely accepted, with the threat of a cane or slipper keeping many pupils in line. Teachers were figures of authority, and respect for hierarchy was emphasized from an early age. Academic instruction leaned heavily on rote learning, memorization, and formal assessments, leaving little room for creative approaches or personalized teaching. Despite the strictness, schools also provided structure in otherwise uncertain times. Lessons instilled a sense of responsibility, punctuality, and perseverance, while extracurricular activities such as sports or music offered small outlets for expression. Uniforms reinforced conformity, yet even within these confines, pupils found ways to assert individuality through hairstyles, accessories, or mannerisms. The combination of discipline and social expectation shaped behavior both inside and outside the classroom, teaching resilience and adaptability. In many ways, these experiences created a generation accustomed to authority, yet hungry for personal freedom and self-expression in the wider world. The 1970s saw Britain becoming an increasingly diverse society, shaped by immigration from former colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and South Asia. This influx brought rich cultural traditions, music, cuisine, and languages, adding vibrancy to communities that had previously been largely homogeneous. Children growing up in urban areas often encountered peers from very different backgrounds, exposing them to new perspectives and experiences from an early age. Yet the decade was also marked by significant racial tensions and challenges to integration. Discrimination in housing, employment, and education was common, and incidents of prejudice sometimes escalated into public confrontations or violence. Immigrant families often faced economic hardships on top of social exclusion, while their children navigated complex identities, balancing heritage and British upbringing. Despite these difficulties, the blending of cultures left an enduring imprint on British society. Music, fashion, and culinary traditions evolved in unique ways, shaping the social landscape for future generations. For young people growing up amid these changes offered both challenges and opportunities to learn empathy, resilience, and the value of cultural exchange. If you enjoyed discovering what it was truly like to grow up in 1970s Britain, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of history, culture, and the stories behind the decades. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a video, and share your own memories or thoughts about the 70s in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective.